Hey everybody, Pastor Scott here, coming to you today with the response to our latest video or our latest lesson, Wilderness to Land. I want to say thank you again for engaging with the material. I know there was a lot of ground that we covered in the narrative in last week's lesson, and there was a lot to sort of take in, and just a lot. This one is covers a lot of ground, of course. Some of the different things I just want to follow up on. You definitely picked up on how the Israelites have a really short memory, that they've just gone through some very miraculous things. They've seen some awesome displays of God's power, some probably terrifying displays of God's power with the 10 plagues and then the Red Sea. And yet, then as they get out into the wilderness, it takes them about 5 minutes before they start to complain. And that's a human tendency, I think. When things get hard, when things get difficult, we have the tendency to just focus in on that. And then we get those rose colored glasses to what the things were. You know, they're remembering how well the Egyptians gave us food and water and they provided for us, even though we were slaves. And maybe being slaves wasn't that bad. There's an old saying that I think of: the devil that you know is better than the one that you don't. And they don't know what to expect in the wilderness. They don't know what will happen. They don't know if they'll have the provisions that they need. And at least back in Egypt, they had them. So I think that's maybe where some of that comes from, even though God is promising to take care of them and to provide for them. Maybe it's preferable to, like, well, at least then we had it and we don't know what's going to happen now. So I think that's where some of that is probably coming from. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about is just the connection between the Shema, that creed or that statement that's back in Deuteronomy 6, along with Jesus' teaching that we heard about and that we looked at out of Matthew. Um, Love God and love your neighbor. They really stem from the Ten Commandments and the focal point of the Ten Commandments. Now, that's something preview wise that we're going to start to look at in this week's lesson. And then also next year, when we're looking at small catechism stuff, we'll actually dive into the Ten Commandments a little bit more fully, even than what we're going to get here this coming week. So that's kind of really where that's coming from. That's the law side of things. And then the prophets, their various writings or their addresses would come up when the people were failing to, to live in harmony with one another, failing to follow the ways of the commandments, to love God and to love our neighbors. So that's really where that kind of comes from. And Jesus, being a Jewish guy, would have been familiar with all of those writings, what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Hebrew Bible. All of that that is something that he would have been familiar with. So that's kind of where all that connection comes from, and you definitely picked up on that. You all kind of thought that the weirdest stuff was the meat coming out the nostrils, and admittedly, I really zeroed in on that in the video. I know I did because I think it's funny. I don't know where that expression comes from or why God would say that. Like, if you want meat, I'll give you meat till it comes out your nose. That's just weird. It's possible that that was an expression in their culture that just refers to you have so much of something that you get tired of it, that you get sick of it, that it's irritating to you. I don't know. I'm speculating with that, but that was one of the things that sort of came up. And the other thing that you picked up on that seemed very strange to you is that Moses got to see the promised land and then he died, and that's weird too, right? Like, was it timed that way? Why did things happen that way? And I don't really know, other than that was Moses. Maybe being able to see the promised land is because he was faithful to so much in following God over the course of his lifetime, and yet because like we said, because he took credit for some things that God had provided. That's like God just telling the rest of the first generation of the Israelites that I'll be with you in the wilderness, but you're not going to take the land because you didn't trust me. You weren't faithful to it. Is there good news in here? And yeah, I think there is. God is faithful to the people, like we were just saying. God cares for them in the desert, even as that generation is slowly dying off. God's with them in the next generation, with Joshua, as they are taking over the promised land and taking possession of the promised land. But I think in addition to that good news for this culture, there's also there's a word of warning, and we didn't really get into this in the video or even in the readings, but this is present and it's important to remember that God tells the people, I am with you. I have shown you that I will be present with those who are marginalized, those who are downtrodden, with those who are weaker and have been taken advantage of by the powers of the world. Now, don't become that. I mean, there's always a sensibility like, remember how you had it in Egypt? Don't become the new Egypt. Don't, even as you take this promised land, don't become the people or the culture or the nation or whatever that then takes advantage of everyone else. And preview, well, they do exactly that in the long run. We won't get there now for a couple more lessons yet, but ultimately that's exactly what happens, and God takes issue with that. So is there good news? Yeah, there is. But there's also like there's a word of warning too of, remember, we're called to live in harmony with God and with one another, and not to use our own position to take advantage of others. So thanks for another great week. Looking forward to this week again. Look for that towards the end of the week. Take care, everybody.